Good morning. It's so wonderful to see all of you today. I'm so happy that you could all be here and that we can spend this time together and with God. I hope you enjoyed that song. I felt it was a really good introduction to my topic today. There's actually so much to this topic. A lot was covered in this song. I actually have another song that I was so torn between the two. And so I'm going to share the second song with you at the end to wrap it up. But I felt this was the words of this song were a really good introduction. So we're getting close to the end of our sermon series on attitudes of faith, attitudes of a life of faith. Also could be referred to as fruits of the Spirit. Or if we have a real life of faith, if we have a real relationship with God, then there are natural byproducts. There's natural attitudes that come up in us, that manifest in our lives as a result of our life of faith. So we've been covering a lot of them, and today I want to talk about forgiveness. And it's a little bit funny because it was hard for me to talk about this topic, because there's actually so much material on this topic. There's so many famous quotes about this topic. It's a very common theme in religion and Christianity. But my struggle is, I don't want to just share about what forgiveness is and talk about forgiveness. What I really want is for each person to find that in their heart. I know there's a lot of people who are struggling with something in their heart. And so my desire was, how can I bring that out? But the thing is, I can't actually, because I'm not forgiving. It has to come from within each person. But my hope is that through this message that we can go maybe a little bit deeper than what we normally think about when we think about forgiveness. And maybe go somewhere in your heart that you haven't been to for a while. So, as I said, there's so much out there about forgiveness. I'm just going to share a few quotes. Some of these are maybe familiar to you. They're good food for thought. They're good starting points. So, maybe you've heard this, and it was kind of in the song too. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner was you. Forgive others, not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve peace. You've heard this one. I think we've shared this one before. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It takes a strong person to say sorry, and an even stronger person to forgive. So, and we try to teach this to kids from a very young age, right? To say sorry and forgiveness. Susie hits Billy. And then we say, oh, Susie, don't do that. Say you're sorry, say you're sorry. And so Susie goes, I'm sorry, Billy. And then you go, okay, Billy, now you say, it's okay, I forgive you. It's okay, I forgive you. And okay, now hug and make up, And we try to teach, it's good. It's good to have that framework in our minds from a young age, so it's not bad. But it's, forgiveness is a lot more complex than that. It goes deeper than that, and it comes from a deeper place than that. Because it's a very personal thing. If somebody takes something from us and then gives it back and says they're sorry, it's easy for us to forgive them. But that's not typically the situation that we're in when it comes to forgiveness. It's a very personal thing because the things that we are hurting about are very close to our heart. Experiences of pain go very deep. And so likewise, forgiveness is not just in the words that we say, but it also has to come from our heart. So I have a couple of quotes from the Bible, and there's actually a lot of them that are very similar to these few that I'm sharing, and I felt that it was a very good introduction, or it opened up a door to forgiveness and what it really is. So I'm going to share these quotes with you. This is from Mark 11:25. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone. Anybody holding anything against anybody here? Nobody, right? Nobody. Forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. Now look at this one. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Now this is interesting because the first one is saying, if you forgive others, then God can forgive you. And this one is saying, because God forgave you, you can forgive others. And there's lots and lots of quotes. If you go onto the internet and you search quotes about forgiveness in the Bible, there's probably about 15 that are like this. But they're on to something. Forgive others as God forgives us. And when we forgive others, it opens a door for God to forgive us. So forgiveness of others and accepting forgiveness for ourselves, those two things are integrally connected. It's almost simultaneous. A genuine experience of one, either experiencing a forgiveness for something that you've done, or a genuine outpouring of forgiveness to someone who's wronged you, it lends itself to the other. A genuine experience with one lends itself to a genuine experience with the other. And this, I think, is another good quote that kind of reflects that. Oh, I actually didn't put it in here. This is a quote. This is by an author, a Brazilian author, named Paulo Coelho. How people treat other people is a direct reflection of how they feel about themselves. How people treat other people is a direct reflection of how they feel about themselves. When someone is angry, often is angry at other people, most likely they have anger and frustration at themselves, within them. When someone expresses kindness and compassion and love for other people consistently, most likely that person has a compassion and love for themselves. We need to have that too. And similarly, when we understand forgiveness for ourselves, when we have experienced either someone else's forgiveness of us for something we have done to them, or a genuine experience of feeling God's forgiveness to us, then it is naturally reflected in the desire to share that with other people. But what does it take to lead someone to forgive a person? If it's hard to forgive someone, if you find it hard to find it in your heart to give forgiveness to somebody, sometimes we can say the words and not really mean it. We can want to do it. I know it's good. And I can tell somebody, yeah, I've forgiven them. But we know in our hearts we haven't. If it's hard to forgive someone, then there's something in you that makes it hard to accept forgiveness for yourself as well. So it's not just simple. It's not just like Susie and Billy. It's very complex. It's mixed up. Our relationships with other people are mixed up with our relationships with ourselves and our relationship with God. Perhaps you have a hard time expressing love to your spouse. You want to. You appreciate them. You know they're God-given. But it's hard to share that, and you often find yourself expressing frustration or anger instead. And that is painful to them, and you know it. And maybe you feel bad about the way that you speak to them sometimes. And so you know that you need some forgiveness, but at the same time, it's hard to own that. It's hard to be responsible. It's hard to ask for forgiveness because you might want to justify, or you might want to place blame on somebody else. Because, well, my parents, they didn't express love to me. Even though they should have loved me, they expressed anger and frustration to me. So I don't know how to express love. So even though we can feel bad about something we're doing, there's often a blame or frustration there that doesn't allow us to take responsibility for the action that we feel bad about. You can think of the things that you've done that you're not proud of. But there is a hurt and a resentment towards others behind those things which prevent you from taking responsibility. So these things are so closely tied, but when I think of a good example of how this plays out, how this restoration happens, how forgiveness happens, one of my favorite scenes, and I think I've showed this in a couple of sermons. I'm not going to show it today, but I'm going to share about it. How many of you have seen Les Miserables? Okay, about half. The rest of you should go watch it. And there's like 3 versions. There's an old version, like a black and white version, I think. There's a 90s version. And then there's a one that just came out maybe 4 or 5 or 6 years ago. They're all good. So I don't care which one you go see. But in the 90s version, okay, the main character is Jean Valjean. And this story takes place over like 20 years. It's a life story. Jean Valjean was caught as a young man stealing bread, and he was placed into prison for like 20 years. He finally gets out of prison, and he's trying to find his way in the world. This priest accepts him into his home and says, look, you look like you're down on hard times, come in, I'll feed you, spend the night before you go on, and I'll take care of you. So he spends the night, but he's full of resentment, because how wrong is it to be put in prison for 20 years because of stealing a piece of bread, right? And he's full of anger and full of resentment, and he's just thinking about, what can I get out of my life from this point? And so in the middle of the night, while the priest is sleeping, he gets up and he starts going through drawers, and he's stealing the cutlery and the silver pieces and whatever he can find and stuffing it in a bag. The priest wakes up and hears this noise, and he stands in front of him, and then Jean Valjean smacks him over the head. And then the servants are like, oh my gosh, and they call the police, and Jean Valjean is running away, but the police catch him and bring him back to the priest. And what does the priest do? This is such a beautiful part of the movie. I love sharing this. The police drag Jean Valjean back to the priest, and the priest says, oh, my friend, why didn't you leave without telling me? If I'd known you were going, I would have given you the silver candlesticks too. And the policemen are like, huh? But because the priest is so genuine in his love for this person and won't charge him, then the police let him go. But Jean Valjean in that moment is just completely overwhelmed with the love and forgiveness that he just received. Because he didn't deserve it. He'd acted with totally wrong intentions, and yet he received grace. And so from that moment, his life was transformed. And the story goes on and on. There's, he saves this prostitute who's obviously made mistakes, but he shows her God's love and grace. He even when she's on her deathbed, he resolves to take care of her child who is being abused in another family's home. And so he raises this child that's his own child, and he becomes a wealthy and wonderful man who tries to help many people in his town. He becomes very famous in his area for being like a kind and generous, wonderful person. And there's a lot of also political parts of the story as well, the revolution and stuff. But at the end of the story, I like to share that part of his transformation, but it comes from the beginning and it goes all the way to the end. At the very end of the story, his adopted daughter has fallen in love with one of these instigators of this revolution, right? He's a little bit of a naive. I don't particularly like him myself. But Jean Valjean, because he loves his daughter, he loves this person too. And this person gets injured in the revolution, and so Jean Valjean is trying to escape and save him. And do you know who he gets confronted by? Anybody remember? The policeman who was the supervisor at the prison from when he was in prison for stealing bread. And it's only in that, and the policeman has finally recognized, oh, this is the same person who was in prison for stealing bread, and this person deserves to go back to jail. And in the final moments of the movie, the policeman is about to kill Jean Valjean. But then Jean Valjean says, take me. Just leave this young man so my daughter can be with him. Take me. And he gives his forgiveness to the man who caused him so much pain all those years ago and all that resentment that almost destroyed his life. And that policeman, faced with that forgiveness, is transformed and can't turn him in. So, if you haven't seen this movie, it is so powerful. It's a beautiful story, not just of a moment of forgiveness, but how forgiveness can change the trajectory of our life and the lives of the people around us, our relationships, our children's lives. We need to forgive others in our life. And we need to ask for and accept forgiveness for ourselves. So part of that story was showing that there's a relationship and an integral experience of being forgiven and sharing forgiveness with others, and how that stops evil in its path, how that stops selfishness in its path, how that stops this negative spiral that humanity tends to go down. It's almost impossible to experience forgiveness for yourself without letting go of resentments towards others and giving them forgiveness. And likewise, if you have that experience of being freed from your sins, freed from that guilt, then the natural next step is to share it with others. I will say forgiveness doesn't erase everything. In our faith, we talk about restoration, indemnity. And restoration is real. Restoration is a thing. It doesn't erase restoration that needs to happen. But it does erase the barriers in our hearts. It erases the pain. It erases the guilt and the prison of victimhood. This is another quote from the Bible. Then I acknowledged my sin to you, and I did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. It's not, if you think about, if you're a kid, maybe you're a kid and you broke something one time, and a window, a lamp, and you still have to pay for the window, or you still have to pay to replace the lamp. That's restoration, okay? But when our parents forgive us, but the worst part of it is the guilt we feel if we don't share it, right? The worst part is feeling like, oh no, if they find out, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I should never have done that. Why did I do that? And and it's just this never-ending feeling of fear and guilt. But if we go to our parents or our neighbors and say, I'm so sorry, I broke your window. Can you forgive me? And then they forgive you and you realize, they actually still love me. I'm not going to be excommunicated from my family because I broke a lamp. Although when you're a kid, sometimes you feel like that could happen, But when you feel that love and forgiveness, that's what's freeing, even if you still have to pay for the lamp, right? Forgive the guilt of my sin. People who have experienced forgiveness and forgive others are people who know peace in their lives. It doesn't mean their lives are easier. The external circumstances of their lives may not change too much. At least initially, they can actually change a lot. They have challenges too, but they experience them differently because their way of life is different. The best people to learn from, I'm sure the most historic story ever, is that of Jesus on the cross. Right? The people that he came to love, the people that he said, I wish you were as chicks to a hen. I would gather you under my wings. I would keep you safe. I would save you. And those very people nailed him to a cross. But what did Jesus say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Another totally moving example is that of our own true parents, Reverend and Mrs. Moon. When Reverend Moon, our true father, was captured by communists in North Korea for telling people about God and telling people about freedom, he was tortured and beaten within inches of his life. And he said, with every beat of the bat, with every stick, I was forgiving these people. They don't know what they're doing, and I forgive them. These are a couple of quotes from our true mother. My husband and I have forgiven the unforgivable, and for the sake of humanity, loved enemies unlovable. No matter how unjust the persecution we receive, we do not blame anyone. Rather, we love them. When we overcame ordeals in this manner, blessings that we could not even imagine took place. This is another one. We must live a life of forgiveness. When you forgive the sins of others, amazing blessings are given to us from heaven. These are powerful experiences of faith. And they're not logical. They're not expected. But maybe you feel that, these are really special people we're talking about here, Pastor Adonia. I'm not Jesus. I'm not Reverend and Mrs. Moon, so that's a little bit far out of reach. But there are many people who've experienced this. I want to share a little story. Some of you even know this family. The year before I went to my missions program, there was a girl in our missions program. She was fundraising, selling things to make money for the mission, and she was murdered while fundraising. It was a young man who was mentally unstable, and without rhyme or reason or cause, she was murdered. And when I went on the missions program, it was a year afterwards, and on the anniversary of her passing, we did a memorial for her. But what was most impressive to me was that the leaders of our program were sharing about this girl's parents. How would you feel if it was your child who'd been murdered? How could you feel? How could you even think? How could you survive? But what I learned is that the parents of this girl would go to visit this murderer in jail. And they would share love with this person. And the parents of this girl sent letters to this person's parents, letters of condolences, because their child, who was having a difficult life, was now in jail. And it was almost unfathomable to me. How could these parents give so much love to the person who caused them the most pain? And that person's family. But I realized it's just what that first quote about setting a prisoner free. You think you're forgiving somebody else. You think you're setting them free from their guilt of their sins. But actually, you're setting yourself free. I realized I don't think that these parents they would either have to be consumed by anger, consumed by grief, consumed by frustration, consumed by the injustice and the unfairness of it all. Or they could forgive. I realize forgiveness is not just something nice we do for others. Forgiveness is necessary for our own wholeness. Forgiveness is necessary for our own life of faith. Forgiveness is necessary for our own peace. And also when we can recognize that the people who have hurt us are coming from a place of hurt. When we can see not only from our perspective, but God's whole perspective, then we can find compassion and understand God's love for people and find forgiveness more easily. I know it's not easy. You know, anytime I have a really deep conversation with another sister or with somebody who really opens up their heart, I'm pretty sure almost every single person in this room has had experiences of abuse, physical, sexual, mental, verbal, neglect. Unfortunately, many of us experience these things as children. There are very few people in this room who haven't. I know it. And we've also experienced betrayal, heartbreak. We don't go through life without experiencing these things. But these are things that God's children were never meant to experience. So they're very violating experiences. I know that. It's amazing you're all here. Right? So I know it's not easy. These things are very deep. They're things we're never meant to have experienced. They cause us pain, but they also cause God pain. Because God's ideal for us, right, was to grow up in the love of our parents, in the love of our siblings, and the love of our neighbors and our aunts and our uncles. To grow up to then share that love with others and our own children, and then to return to love when we pass away. That was what we were designed for. And yet the opposite is the experience of humankind. So, I know it's not easy. Some of you know what this experience of forgiveness is like. I know some of you have very deep experiences. I myself, my relationship with my dad and my family is only the way it is because of forgiveness. A lot of you have that experience, but a lot of you want that and just don't know how you're ever going to get there. Or maybe you've had these experiences and you just stuff them out of your memory, out of your, you almost don't acknowledge that they happened. But I tell you, those experiences are eating away, and they show up in your life whether you like it or not. When we're the ones causing the pain, we can ask for forgiveness and we can work to restore the situation. That's the power of acknowledging when we have caused pain to others, right? We've all experienced this pain, and as a result, whether we like it or not, we've probably passed it on to others. We have the power to ask for forgiveness. But when we're the ones who have been hurt, all we can do is forgive. We can't force an apology. We can't force them to make amends. All we have the power to do is forgive, and it takes courage. Like that quote said, it takes a strong person to apologize, but it takes an even stronger person to forgive. It takes courage because we have to be vulnerable. And I recommend expressing forgiveness not only just in your mind. I think I've done this before, like, okay, I forgive that person. But it's really powerful when you express it to them. In words or in writing. Sometimes those people are not on this earth anymore, and we can't express in words to them, but we can write to them. We can tell them in our prayers. And we can also ask forgiveness from those people. Some of the people that we've hurt are not in front of us or God, but we can ask for forgiveness in our prayers and feel that that's there for us. And do it when you're ready. Maybe today is not your day, but I hope that this can be a time for you to look at those experiences in your life. Look at those people in your life and let it be there for you. Let it be real for you. And maybe just by letting it be there, then over time you can find a way. Find it in your heart. Because it can't just tell you to forgive and you forgive. You got to find it in your own heart. But I will say that when we forgive, we're doing something that evil and selfishness, you could say Satan, cannot do. Evil cannot forgive. Devil cannot forgive. So when we forgive, we're stopping this vicious cycle of being hurt and hurting others in its tracks. We're doing something not only for that person and not only for ourselves. We're actually doing something for God. You may think it's not a big deal, this quibble that you have with your sister, or this resentment you have to your parents, or this lover who broke your heart. You may think that's in the past, it doesn't matter, and I'm not going to look at that anymore. But when we forgive, that is a victory for God too. And it's helping to build the kingdom here on earth. It really is bringing heaven to earth when we forgive. It changes our future, it changes that person's future, and it changes the landscape, the spiritual landscape of this earth. So with that, I have one more song I want to share. This is who remembers when Sarah Ada came a couple years ago and did a music service for us? Wasn't that beautiful? I hope we can have her back again sometime. But she wrote a song called Forgiveness, or When These Things Come to Pass. And although the first song I shared I felt had very good words, I felt this song really just shares like the heart, our longing to find a way to forgive. And the music, I feel, really carries us there. So I just want to finish with that song, and then I'll pray. And it's not a picture, it's just listen.
How do I unwind what heart's been wound up so tight over centuries and centuries, fist clenched hard, pink and white. How do I unwind? I wanna see myself and try to reacquaint with what's left when I strip away the varnish and the paint. I wanna see myself. I wanna know you and not like others do, not like looking through that twisted glass called pleasantries and politeness. I just wanna know you. When these things come to pass, all we'll need is forgiveness. I try to rewire my mind, go back in time and find a piece to the puzzle, a reason or a rhyme, prevent contingencies of a crime. I try to rewire my mind. No, a bandage will not suffice. This wound will only heal when I come to realize that the outward pain is coming from the inside. No, a bandage will not suffice. And when these things come to pass, when these things come to pass, all we'll need is forgiveness.
Please join me in prayer. Heavenly Parent, we come here as families, as parents, as brothers and sisters and children, but most importantly, God, we all come here as your children. God, as I stand here right now, I feel that your heart is so open and so embracing. You're just so happy that we're even here. We're even thinking about you. That we want to comfort your heart. And you see how we are broken in so many ways. You know where each one of us came from. You know each pain that we have endured because you were there with us and you felt that pain. You know why we cause pain to others, but you forgive us. God, I pray that we can just accept that forgiveness and want to return more goodness and more love and more beauty to you and be called to share that incredible, unending love and compassion and kindness with others. That's really what you want to see on this earth. You want to see the cycle of pain and the cycle of hurt stop. You want to create a new paradigm of love and forgiveness. God, I pray that each one of us can look into our hearts, see where we might need to have a little bit of courage. It's really hard to say those words. It's really hard to make that phone call. It's really hard to look somebody in the eyes when we feel that they've caused us too much pain. But God, I pray that you can be with us. We can take courage in you. And we can set a new path for us in our life with that forgiveness. God, thank you so much for your patience with us as we work through these twists and turns of our life. Thank you so much for always being there with us. We want to offer this service, begin this week with you, and I offer this prayer in my name, Michael Antonio Hentrick, Bus Central family. Amen and adieu.